Good morning, everyone. Welcome. This is Angela Coulter and
Sarah Sieg Avignoni.
bringing you this week's Ascended World. So, apologize for being a little late. Sometimes technical difficulties preclude us getting on at the scheduled time.
The weekend always brings about unexpected software updates.
Right.
Yeah. Exactly. Turns out there's a new version of Chrome for the Mac.
Don't you love that? And sometimes, like on the computer, it's funny on even the PC, it's like it won't sometimes tell me there's an update, except that the computer starts acting clunky, and then it's like, then I'll go to reboot it, and then it'll be like, okay, wait 25 minutes as we update your computer.
Yeah.
Like,
well, apparently this it didn't tell me. It just came up and said, what's new in Chrome, after I finally restarted everything. So that's my guess, is that it was an update not quite finished. Yeah. Which, that's a perfect lead into what we're talking about.
Right. It is really.
Changes and the fallout from the changes and the trickle down of the changes
it's funny how, and coming right into that topic, it's funny how we get very wary of things changing too much, right?
Right.
Because what we mean most of the time when a client comes into me, I'm talking to somebody, what we mean most of the time when we say, well, I want this to change, right, means I want this to change in the way that I can control the definition of what it is in the way that I think I want it, right?
Right. I want it to change, but only like this.
Right. I only want to change this thing right here. And then we get into this place of not recognizing what the change is, like actually achieving this change will have all this ripple effect into all these different things. It's the same thing about when we do energy work, like when we do Trinity with people and whatever. And it's like, okay, so we're doing this, but because this is only a small piece of this whole bigger picture, when we shift this, it's going to shift everything else. So sometimes people say, oh, that's just too intense. It's too, too scary. Right.
And when we talk about that, because, the only person that heals somebody is yourself. You can only heal, nobody else can heal you. And you can only heal yourself to the extent that you allow.
Right.
So if you go in and say, okay, well, I want this little symptom to go away, to be gone, you can change the energy and allow all the ripple effect of that. But if the person goes, nope, I can't do that, then that piece might be better temporarily, but it's
temporarily, right, yes,
it's going to
temporarily is the key,
or it's going to come back in slightly a different way. So it leads you to believe, well, it kind of worked, or it didn't work, or you just didn't do what you said you would do, or
right. Good morning, Yasmin. Yes, so many things about and that's the funny part. We have gotten, and this is a little side note, like in terms of like energy healing and stuff like that, we talk about being healers and everything else. And it's like, we recognize somebody who truly gets into energy healing, we recognize that nobody heals us except for ourselves, right? And we recognize that the only thing we really do when we work with others is hold a space to help them remember a frequency they've forgotten, right? That would help them to shift those things in a much more accelerated fashion, right? So when we do that, it's like the higher self of that person says, okay, I'll accept that, like you're saying. And so then, or not, right? Because it is up to the,
I love somewhere I saw that, self-healing is actually a redundancy,
right?
Because there's nothing but self-healing. Even if it's in a large medical facility, you can have major surgery and it still doesn't heal you.
Right.
At some point you are responsible for that allowing that healing.
Right. And so we don't, so like when we get back to this specific is, a lot of times I have discussions, and we do this between us as well, with ourselves. It's like, why is it we want to change this? And we'll get so far, and then we fall back into the same pattern, the same habit or whatever. And that's when we hit ourselves up with the difficult question of, well, if having is evidence of wanting, then why do I have it? Why do I want it? Why do I want this still? Right. And a lot of times
why am I creating this for myself?
Yes. And the hard questions are you willing to change this? And I don't want to say hard, because the hard is only a perception of the ego, but this is all ego, right? So it's all ego. And it's like, really, the hard questions that we don't want to ask ourselves when we say, I want to change something is, okay, in actually attaining my happiness, or remembering my happiness, remembering my bliss, living my passion, will I have to let go of this relationship? Will I have to let go of my marriage? Will I have to step away from the role of motherhood or fatherhood that I've had, or spousehood or whatever, to really live and saturate myself in this? Because then the ego says, oh, well, that's too scary. Like, but then what's going to happen? And there's going to be all this fallout and whatever.
Or let go of the belief of who you think you are.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. I was reading something talking about how one of the most powerful things you can do, especially women, is to write down all the things that, what would happen if I were a bad girl?
Yes.
And just see all the places that you're holding yourself back because you believe you need to be a good girl, which is all ego.
Well, and all ego and all externalized, because who defines what a good girl is, right? And who defines what a bad girl is? People usually around you, your culture, and all that kind of stuff.
It's definitely not something that it's things you've adopted, not things that you've created.
Right. And so it's a challenging thing, because the questions, these are hard. These are the questions that are challenging that we get a lot now, right? Because we work with a lot of people who work on themselves, and yes, are very good at seeing things and processing and shifting things. And then they're like, the hard question, why won't I change this? Why won't I let myself change this? Why doesn't this change? Because I'm changing, because I've changed all of this. And it's like, well, there's some reason you're holding on to it. There's something you're holding on to.
I've always believed that, and I've witnessed it in my life, where you continue with things that you struggle with until they become so uncomfortable that the discomfort of changing is less than the discomfort of staying where you are.
Yes.
And it's we've talked about that so many times, about how we need that propulsion. Well, we need that trigger, that something to make us force us down a different path. And I think that in that getting to that tipping point in that discomfort, that's again that propulsion.
It is the ultimate in procrastination, and that's what the ego loves to do. Because the ego says,
then it's justifiable because I had no choice.
Right. I pushed myself to the level, but we never take that self-responsibility of,
oh, right,
I pushed myself to the level that I ignored this for so long that I had to get fired from my job, and I had to, or I had to have my spouse leave me, or I had to have, something happen that precipitated that major change that I feared so much. And I remember one year, it was like 5 or 6 years ago, where I had like a 6-month period where almost every client I had the worst case scenario happen that they had been terrified of creating. And so much so that they created it. Right. And there were like these huge explosions everywhere. I had all these calls of crying and emergency sessions and everything else. And then it was like, and then when they got through it, and it was all a matter of flowing through it, just flow through it, sit with it, allow it, flow through it and stay on course. And on the tail end, then I would always ask them, so is it as bad as you thought it would be? And not one person ever said yes. Every other person said it was bad, but it was far less. It was not even close to as bad as I had imagined it.
Much less worse.
Yeah. Right. And now on the tail end, it's like, oh, what a relief. Like I didn't realize how much baggage I was carrying and how much energy it took for me to hold that baggage.
Right.
And I feel so much more like, oh, thank God that's gone now. Right.
Right.
And so like we can say this from a very high level perspective, but the ego hates that letting go of things it's comfortable identifying with. Right. So again, it's living situations, it's, spousal situations, it's roles we've accepted, it's a comfortable job that pays the bills, right?
Right. Financial,
right? And then these are the things that we justify, the ego justifies to say, oh, well, I love to do this, but I can't because this pays the bills. But I can't, but then I'll never give this a chance to pay the bills because this is what I believe has to. And so I'll never get past, it's like my husband and I had gotten into this conversation where, he's in sort of he's been in a career challenge and moving forward and stuff. And it's like, well, being an expert in what you do because you've been doing it for so long, right? And then you're getting called to do something else is scary, especially in mid-adulthood, right? And you get called to do something else. And it's like, well, but then the ego justifies it and says, oh, but look at how comfortable it is over here. Like you're an expert, you know what you're doing.
You finally achieved that. So you deserve the break.
That's right.
You deserve the rest.
That's right. And, you don't have to, and if you moved into something different, oh, that would be so much effort. That would be so much energy. And, oh, we don't really, and underneath that is, I don't really know if I'm worthy of that. I don't really know if I'm smart enough, if I have enough energy. It'll be too much work. It's going to be too hard. This is so much easier. And then I can still, pursue the things I like, love on the weekend.
And this appears and appeases me as a sure thing.
Yes.
This is safe. This is secure.
Yes. And this happens for all of us in different ways.
And it's not just jobs.
No. Relationships, marriages, because we created this paradigm in our culture, well, around the world too, that, marriage is supposed to be forever. Right. And that if it's not forever, then it was a failure. And we have and
broken homes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I know so many people who now have gone through divorce, right? And then think that did divorce in that conscious way and then looks back and then feels guilty, like they screwed everything up. And it's like, no, you freed everything up and to make it better, to make you all free to really, create your own paradigm. Right.
Well, and to a certain extent, that's part of honoring each other's journey.
Yes. What if we had no connection, no attachment to that? What if we had no attachment to that and just said, I'm with you here today.
Right.
100% at the table. We're walking together on the path today. And tomorrow morning we might wake up and be like, maybe not today.
Yeah, that's not my path today.
Yeah. Just as much as saying, I want to wear a blue shirt or a red shirt today. Yeah, maybe I'll wear the red one.
And I think that there wouldn't be near as much animosities and hardship in the breakup process if we had more of that attitude, that the culture of that unconditional support in the moment.
Yes. Good morning, Gloria. So, and how does, so this ties in terms of, here's the thing. Last week, we talked about that glimmer exercise, right? So I hope y'all have been doing the glimmer exercise. Let me hear in the comments if you're here from last week and you've been doing it. I want to see yes. I want to see yes. But the glimmer exercise is this, because we get so stuck in our gotta trudge through, gotta make it through the day, gotta fulfill that. I gotta get through what I'm supposed to do. Yasmin says yes, that's awesome. But I've got to push through and whatever. And then we think, okay, so a day. So here's the uncomfortable things to look at, right? If we so the glimmer exercise is to take every moment and find those moments where they're so sublime, right? That we find that peace and happiness. And then we start to focus on those more than we focus on the other things, right? And then we stop pushing through, because then we're good with being present in the moment, because we're allowing that glimmer, right?
It's almost like that reward. The glimmer is the
Yeah.
reward in the moment.
Right. And then eventually what happens is it grows to such a point that we get to this place where, why would I not want every moment to be a glimmer moment? Right.
Exactly.
And if I can't be there in this relationship, in this job, in this living situation, in this whatever, then how do I change it? Then it starts becoming more of a motivation to change from that place of self-love, from that place of self-nurturing, right? Which
Right.
of course we talk about incessantly.
Right. And that is supported by that self-responsibility.
Yes. Yeah. So the reason, that's why this stuff, because here's the thing, we don't ask ourselves these questions because we hide them from ourselves so much, right? So if we,
Right.
so what if something like this glimmer exercise is simply a way around the ego, right? To then finally say to the ego, well, look at all those awesome moments. So in those awesome moments, who was I with? A lot of times you're by yourself.
Me, myself, and I.
And then you realize, oh, wait a second. Or it's not while you're at work, or it's not while you're in this environment, or it's not while you're doing this, but it's like, oh, so if those are where my glimmer moments are, why would I not create more of those glimmer moments? Because then I would have like my whole life being a glimmer moment. Right. And that's the connection. That's the way around the ego too, because otherwise the ego will give you a million reasons why not to change something.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And everything from, well, like my mother used to say, better the devil you know than the devil you don't know.
Which is what we say all the time to ourselves.
Right. Or is it really that bad?
Yes. And that I've been seeing a lot with people who have gone through divorce and then like look over their shoulders and they're like, oh, did I really overreact? Was this really not, like what I thought? And it's like, it was exactly how you felt it was, it's like, don't get yourself caught up in a moment of changing, of where you've changed to and what you are continuously changing to, because then what happens is the ego goes, oh, I'm just so uncomfortable now, because even though the other part of me is going, oh my God, freedom. And I love this freedom to change. Then the ego goes, but we don't know who we are. I don't know who I am. Right?
Well, and when we talk about, again, back to healing and the body's natural state is to be healed and equilibrium, and we have set it up to self-nourish unconsciously. And it is in a constant state of rebalancing and refocusing. And and that entails change.
Mm-hmm.
And the more we try to artificially impose sameness and static, the more the body gets out of line and uncomfortable and strives to break free from that. And so it requires more and more of our energy to keep the sameness.
Yes.
And I love the quote that says the only thing that you can count on is change.
Well, that's really the truth, right?
And
even
that
our
is the
bodies,
truth.
even our bodies are constantly changing. I mean, how many times in our lives have we stopped and said, or said, I can't change this. I can't let go of this, or I can only let go of part of this. And if I did, it would be too painful or too upsetting. And then on the back end saying, oh my gosh, why did I hold on to that for so long? Right. Like how many here who are watching this, like put a yes in the little chat there. Is like, we all have had those moments. Have you had those moments of, oh
Absolutely.
my God, I'm so glad I let go of that.
Right.
Afterward, after the massive fear and crying.
Well, and I had no idea how much that was taxing me and how much of me it was taking up, it was consuming to hold something artificially in place.
Yes. Right. Or, it's like leaving a job. I mean, how many times have we left a job? Either we gotten fired, let go, or whatever. And after all the explosion of freaking out, we're like, oh,
That was the best thing that's ever happened.
Exactly. And yeah, it might have been a little stressful for a while, but a lot of times it gives you the motivation then to really look at what you want to do, really look
Right.
at, because usually here's the pattern. Somebody gets let go from their job, they have a panic because how am I going to pay my bills? How am I going to do this? How am I going to do this? Blah, blah, blah. Or I only have money for this long and I've got to have something with it. And then they sort of panic and they start applying for everything. And then usually the next step after that is, wait a second.
The last thing I want is what I just had.
Yes. Now that I've had, and it's usually like maybe a month or two after that's, like you've gone through that. And then it's like taking a step back and saying, well, let me see if I took a breath here, do I really want to go back to that?
Right. And I mean, you can apply that to anything, like a relationship ending. It's like you adjust to that feeling of alone. But then at the same time, you're like, oh, well, I don't have to do this now. I can do what I want.
Right. Right.
And I can behave and indulge and enjoy in the things just for myself.
Yes. Yes. And that, what's interesting about that I see a lot is parents of kids who they end up getting like joint custody. Right. And at first they're very upset that they don't have the kids on certain weekends or whatever. But then as they settle into, okay, well, I'm not a failure as a parent. I'm like, like blah, blah, blah. And now I have, oh, wait, I have weekends I have every other weekend to myself, or I have this amount of time to myself. And oh, now that I've gotten over the woe is me, I'm by myself or whatever. Now it's like, oh, well, now I have the space to do this. It was funny. A client of mine that, gosh, we went through a huge thing with that. And it was really funny because I think it was maybe 8, 9, 10, 12 months after she got divorced or split up from her ex-husband. And she was like, she said, and it just hit me one night. She goes, it was like a Saturday night and my kids were with their dad that weekend. And I was taking a bath by candlelight. I journaled, I did yoga, I meditated. I felt fabulous. And I thought, oh my God, when was the last time I let myself enjoy this like this? And she was like, what a realization of freedom and saying, you know what? Yes, I miss my kids when they're not here. And yet I get to be myself and still be a parent, and organize both of those things.
And it's not to say that in order to have that, you need to get divorced. That's not the case. No. It's like have that within the relationship as well. Talk about a win-win there.
Right. And that's the thing we typically don't let ourselves do, right?
Exactly.
Oh no, I've spent all my free time with my spouse, or I've spent all my free time, and it's like, I've never been that way. I've just never been that way. But, I can never travel without my spouse. I can never do this without my spouse. And it's like, but you were both separate individuals before you came together. Right. And there was something about each other that attracted you to each other to begin with. So why did you stop being what you were? Right. As you came together. I mean, yes, you evolved into that as well, but then it's like, don't lose, but a lot of times we lose that individual underneath. Right. And so, so that was the whole thing of, but see, in many cases in our lives, that's what happens is we get lost in these roles we think we're supposed to fill so that in a certain way, so that people approve of us. Right. And so when we say, I want change and I want to do this, then it's like how many tears I've seen from so many people, because it's like, oh, but the kids, and it'd hurt the kids, like if they want to leave the marriage or whatever. And I'm not saying, we're not talking just to be an advocate of leaving the marriage, but I'm just saying these are hard questions that people don't like to look at. Right. So it's like, but that's the thing is I'm afraid if I don't do this, and I've heard this come out of a man's mouth, I'm afraid if I don't do this, my ex will never let me see my kids.
Oh yeah. Right.
Yes. Gloria says, don't lose yourself in a relationship. Absolutely. But don't lose yourself in a job. Don't lose yourself in, having to hold a certain role. We get lost in, here's a new one, a sort of new one in our generational, like, our generation's age group is tending to elderly parents.
Yes.
and losing your identity. And you know this.
Yeah, I did this. I
Yeah,
did
you
this.
did. I mean, that's another one. So now we've created another thing of, tending to elderly parents. And then you lose your own identity because you've got to, you feel like you're obligated to do this. And then you disappear because that's all you do. And it's like, well, you lose a chunk of your own self, like by not allowing yourself the space.
Right. Absolutely.
So that's,
Well, and there's so many rules that we stuff ourselves into, and they're like, little boxes, and it's like between, being a spouse or partner, a sibling, a child, a parent, a coworker, a peer, a boss, a subordinate. I mean, it's everywhere. Even you go grocery shopping, you're fit into the box of I'm the consumer. It's everywhere you go and everything you do.
Right.
And if we allow that to override who we are, what kind of self-nourishment is that?
right.
We're abdicating our control.
Right. And when we say things like, so when we come to the table, and the reason we're talking about this is many times we disguise what we really want because of guilt, because of what we've told ourselves we're supposed to be or how we're supposed to be. So we'll just say, like, for example, I've had people, and you want to talk about guilt. I've had people come to me and be like, I wish that my parent would just die. And I feel so terrible about that.
Horrific. Right.
And that's blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, so is that really what you wish? Or is it you wish you were just relieved of the responsibility that you've taken on,
right,
to be the caretaker to that parent? And it's like, well, then let's look at how you could change that and just free yourself up from it. And might it include that parent passing on? It might,
right.
but it also might not. And
it
that's
might also include getting help. It also might include allowing siblings to come in and step up and do their part. It might involve spending some money to have someone come in and give you a break.
Yes. And it doesn't make you a bad person, right? Like you said, I love that. Write down a list of, like, if you were a bad girl, what were all the things you would do, right?
Right.
Or a bad person, because we shy away from that. We say, oh no, I won't even entertain that. Right. How many times have we sat and thought about, like in private, oh, if this person would only go away, the situation would just change. And then we never wanted to come to the light of day, because then we're ashamed. We're ashamed to think about that, for not being grateful. Right. Because every parent who's had kids has at some point said, it'd be great if my kids could just go away for a week or two and give me a break.
Absolutely. That's why they used to have summer camps.
Exactly. Exactly. So it's like, and I even worked through all my kids, growing up. So it was even like the same in the summertime too. It was like, oh, I love my kids. They're just making me crazy, even from work.
Right.
But it's like, so really, that's why it's so important for us to really, I love that. Maybe that's the exercise we give everybody this week, is to write it down on a piece of paper, or in something that makes you feel like you are holding yourself back. Right.
Right.
Write it down on a piece of paper. If I were a bad person, right,
what would I do?
What would I do to alleviate the situation? And and you can be crazy about it if you want, because this is a no holds barred, no judgment. It's like, and yes, we've all had the thoughts of, I would just shoot everybody down, or just something stupid like that, because most of the time we don't mean that.
Right. Absolutely. But I mean, we walk such a fine line, and it's all self-imposed, of what we will believe, what we judge as good and bad.
Yes.
And I'm sure a lot of us have found that some of the things that we have judged as bad, we've actually experienced, and it's like, oh, well, that wasn't so.
Right. And it's like, well, okay, so, we can unwrap these things, right? When we start writing them down, of course, going to journaling, that we sort of throw in there all the time. Journaling is such a really meditative tool, but going in and saying, okay, so if I was a bad person and left my job, right? And a lot of people say that, oh, well, I support my family, or that's what, pays the bills. Okay. Well, then what's the worst that can happen? What could happen if I was a bad person? Then I'd leave the job and not care, right? Not care that my bills weren't paid, not care, like the bills, blah, blah, blah. And, or I would, like a lot of times it's because we judge ourselves that we don't even think about. It's really our judgment, because it's like, okay, except you're denying yourself self-love, and you are in the long term hurting yourself by denying yourself that self-love, right? So it's gonna,
and what if, for instance, your version of being a bad person was that I would move away and leave my family. Okay. So you play that out. You move away and you leave your family, only to find out that actually what you really wanted was a little bit more boundaries to be able to find yourself. And so your judgment of saying this was a bad thing actually brought you back into a closer relationship.
yes, exactly.
So really, is that a bad thing?
Right.
You get into these labels and these judgments, and it's like you have to be really careful with yourself, because those have to be fluid and flexible, and you have to and I hate to use have to, because that is the ego saying, but it's in your best interest to look at it from that expanded perspective.
Yeah.
If the final outcome is you create something that serves everyone so much more fully, how do you see that as a bad thing?
I know, but we go through all these layers of talking ourselves out of things because we believe it makes us bad or whatever. But yes. And, another version of that is an exercise I do with a lot of clients, which is, so what is the worst case scenario? Let's just walk right through the worst case scenario, like that you're afraid of, that you're terrified that's going to happen. Okay. So what if this did happen? Then what? Because a lot of times we stop there, right? We stop at, oh my God, that would be the worst thing. Well, why? Let's walk through that. Because a lot of times it helps us come out the other end to say, oh, this is what, this is what I really would like, and it's the same kind of exercise. It's just a different way of doing it.
Well, and another way to do that is to say, okay, so if I believe this is the worst thing that's going to happen to me, chances are there's going to be some I deem as negative ramifications of it. But what if I say that this will be the best thing that ever happens to me?
Right.
That it will open up so much opportunity. It will enrich relationships. It will invigorate me, and I'll make $1 million.
And that's happened to all of us.
I think we'd run for that.
And it has happened to all of us, though. Like, how many of us here, like anybody here, put it in the chat. Like, how many times is something that you thought was going to be the worst thing that ever happened to you on the tail end, you look back and said, oh my God, that was like the best thing because it helped me get to here. And it broke this pattern, or it broke this chain, or it helped me stand on my own 2 feet. It helped me realize my self-worth. It helped me, break all these chains of, oh, I have to be, like this way in a relationship, I have to be this way in my job, or I have to be this way in my environment, or with money or whatever. And I think about how many times, it's like, okay, well, what if the worst case scenario, like, because a lot of times this will have somebody be like, well, I want to do this, or I want to change this, or I want to change the way I do this. And if I stop acting this way, my husband or wife is going to hate me and they're going to leave me. Right. Okay. So what if they did? And then the other question is, okay, so would you want to stay in a relationship where you cannot be 100% who you are, which many of us have done. Right. And I'm like, what if your spouse loved you even more?
Exactly.
By being 100% of who you are.
Right.
What if it inspired your spouse to be 100% of who they are? And explore that. Being the change we want to be in the world, and it's like, when we start looking at, like you're saying, instead of saying, well, that'll be the worst thing that ever happened, it's like, well, what if that ends up being the best thing that ever happens?
Yep.
And I've seen, like, mothers who stayed at home, who wanted to really go back and do and work, and then they felt guilty. And And I'm like, okay, but here's the thing. Would you rather stay home with your kids and resent them because you're not doing what your heart is telling you to do, right? Doesn't make you love your kids any less at all, right? And or yes, and it might be, would they resent it for a while? They might when you stop being the same person that they could just depend on to be there to do this and take them here and whatever, be their servant basically, right? But maybe does it help them to see that they are allowed to be themselves when they grow up in their relationships and their adult lives, to do what their heart tells them to do? Or would you rather them grow up to say, oh, I have to be a slave to my children like my mother was to me?
Right.
Or father, same thing, right? So Gloria says, I've broken so many patterns, ended relationships that have brought so much growth and peace in my life. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And a lot of times the peace part, we don't realize until afterwards. And we're like, oh,
why did I put up with that for so long?
I know. Always in retrospect, right?
Right.
Yeah. So, and then it's like, well, then why, like we get so caught up in these things. So that's the point here today is ask yourself the hard questions. Why won't I change this? Really, why won't I change this? Really? What am I afraid of? Put it down on a piece of paper and nobody else has to see it. And it might be that I'll be considered a bad person. Why? What would make you a bad person? Like, what if you did all the things a bad person, did in your opinion, or what you think would be? And then, start playing that out. Or that would be a terrible scenario. But what if, I've seen situations where somebody's lost their job. They've been freaking out. They think they can't pay the bills and blah, blah, blah. And they only have the money for X amount of time. And then it freed them to be available for something else that came up that allowed them to change their entire life that they wouldn't have been available for had they been in that other job. So it's like, okay, so that's the seeing the gift in every moment, right? In everything, and say, okay, so when we can do that, the point of this whole conversation is when we start doing that, we will allow all the possibilities and change as we claim we want.
Right.
And we can allow them in the best possible way and accept that what we believe is fallout is simply everything adjusting, the universe adjusting to accommodate you in that vibration of joy, happiness, bliss. I mean, essentially that's what it comes down to, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Usually your fears are greater than what in reality will happen. That's Gloria again. Yeah, exactly.
Always, pretty much always. Like, and that was the whole thing about the clients, the whole period of time where the clients came and were like, yeah, the worst thing that I feared would happen. And then it was like, yeah, okay, that wasn't even close to as bad as I thought. I mean, it was bad, but it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. And now I'm just like relieved.
It could have been.
Yeah.
Right. Or it could have been. Right. Exactly.
So that's why, and that's typically why, if you have something that you keep on circling around to and you can't seem to get past, that's when we have to ask ourselves those hard questions. We have to say, why do I still want this here? What am I afraid of if I let it go? If I truly change this, what am I afraid of? And this is what we're getting to this week, are different possibilities of exercises on how to do that so that you can try to work around the ego a little bit, right? So we did the glimmer exercise last week, and I'll repeat that because I think it's a good exercise. It is just a good retraining in our consciousness, right? Which is find those moments, anything you're doing. Sometimes, like, what? The other, was it this morning or yesterday morning? I was doing like cleaning something in the sink, and where the sun is this time of year, when it's at a certain point, it just like comes right into my kitchen, right? And we had bought these dozen roses. We've been buying roses from like Trader Joe's because they've been putting out beautiful flowers lately, right? So we got these, and they're just beautiful. They're gold with the red edges and whatever, and they're opening. And so it was up on the counter in front of the sink. And so I was washing some in the sink, and the sun came in, and the way it just shone on the flowers, as it was shining through to me, it was such a glimmer moment, right? It was such a beautiful, look at the beauty of these flowers and just this sublime moment of me being present here And what a glimmer moment. And I let it glow, right? So like find those moments of that we just sort of brush through to get to that presence of, well, look at that. Look at that moment of, petting my cat or petting my dog or just snuggling up with my animals or reading a book or just looking at something in nature or taking a breath or just something where you just realize in that moment that you're completely content.
Right. Yeah.
And allowing yourself to grow in that. The more we do that, the more we can work around these ego things, right? Because then we're like, well, why wouldn't I want that in every moment, right? And then do this other thing is if there's something that you can't get out of your life right now or you can't seem to change, ask yourself the hard questions. Why don't I want it to go away? What am I afraid of? And be honest, because that's the thing is we're in so much denial often that we are so masterful at hiding it in the closet and claiming victimhood. I really want this. I don't know why I don't have it.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So
So
the clearing for today.
yes, that's what I was going to say. So the clearing for today would be I allow I allow myself to see all the aspects of the change I desire.
And easily recognize any resistances.
Yep. And embrace them as perfect. And, because I feel like the embracing part is
Oh, very
so
important.
important, right? To get past that judgment. There's that forgiveness thing, right? To get past the judgment, to acceptance and gratitude, to say, okay, it's perfect. And then thanking it for being there, right? And then really looking and saying, okay, well, then I can allow this change, right? In whatever supporting way. And trusting. Oh, let's see. Let's go back to these.
All seven in there.
All 7 of those essences. In case you need a reminder.
Right.
You can go to our Wonderland page. Go check that out. But yeah, holding ourselves in that gentle space of self-nourishment and love to be able to recognize that and to be honest, 100% honest with ourselves.
Yes.
Because until we do that, like we won't change it until we can do that and see it for what it is and thank it and have gratitude for it. Yeah. That feels good.
Yes, it does.
All right.
Awesome.
So we know the road. Everybody get comfortable. Take a deep breath. Close your eyes as we open our hearts and step out of separation back in wholeness and oneness and hold ourselves with the vibration where that is our truth. That is from where we exist, create, and experience. All right. Well, it's going to take a little bit of work there. There was a lot of terror. Well, what do you mean?
Yeah, that was very busy.
Oh, it took a little while. It started to quiet down at the end, but it was like, oh yeah, obviously I hit on a good trigger for this week to look at too.
Right.
Something. So yeah, how about you?
Yeah, it was very busy, very negotiative. Like,
Oh, right,
well, but
right.
if I do this, then what about this? And, very cause and effect. And well, but wait a minute, what about this? And so, yeah, lots of ego in there.
Which of course obviously means that we hit a chord, right? That's what I was like,
Right.
oh, but I see you. I see you. That was me out there. Yeah, feels good though. I feel a lot of tingling going on. So there's some
Right.
adjusting going on. Nice. All right.
Yep.
So everybody do that exercise, do those exercises, take one of any of those that we talked about today. The glimmer exercise, that's the easiest one, but
Right.
you have something
So
stuck, do that bad person exercise,
Right.
like
Right.
if you let yourself do all that, what would it look like, and then really
Right.
step back and go, okay, what's realistic here, and I mean, there's write out worst case scenarios, write out best case scenarios, right? Allow yourself space to explore the things you go, right?
Right. Right. So if you're enjoying these, please like and share. And if you're listening on podcasts and you want to participate in the conversation like other people do, during the live on Facebook, join us there. Be sure to subscribe. Tell us what you think. We'd love feedback. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to know that you're enjoying this. And
if you have any topics that you want to see, then let us know too.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
All
right.
Thanks for listening.
Yes. Thanks for joining us. So we'll see you next time. This is Angela Coulter and
Sarah Sieg Avignoni
signing off with this week's Ascended World. Have a great one, everyone.